This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
I woke up in the middle of the night last night in absolute hysterics. I thought it's absolutely absurd to be giving a talk on the Dakini. You know, I've got all my notes nicely, neatly prepared, most of which I've copied from someone else, somewhere else, mainly Bante, but other sources. It just seemed absolutely absurd to be giving a talk on the Dakini. What need is there to talk about the Dakini? It's like trying to talk about a flame. I mean, you just look at a flame, it radiates light, and if you touch it, it's hot. What more is there to say? So it seemed, really absurd, and I just couldn't stop laughing. It was an unusual thing. Doesn't quite seem so absurd now, unfortunately. So I'm not quite in tune with that. But I think it's a fair point, you know. I mean, okay, what's actually happening? Okay, someone asked me to give a talk on the Dakini. Okay, I'll type in Dakini to some search engine, and up come loads of references, and I get them together, mostly Bante, put them in some sort of order, and then I come in here, and then I say those things to you, then you write them down, and then you go to your group, and you say them to the other people in the group who heard me say earlier in the day. What's actually happening? Where's the Dakini? What's the sort of point? I'm not being cynical, but why do it, if you see what I mean? If it's absurd for me to give a talk on Dakini, why are you writing notes? That's just absurd. I mean, what are your notes for? What are you going to do with them? What are your notes for? This is my first question, and all the note takers must take it down. Why am I writing notes? What will you do with them? Stick them on your shelf, probably. Give you something to say in the group this afternoon, but then after that, what will you do with them? Probably stick them on your shelf. I'm not criticising you as individual note takers. I'm a great note taker myself, and I've got shelves of notes that I never look at. Well, I look at some of them, and they are kind of important. But do you see what I'm getting at? Why are we doing this? Like, what's it for? This is being recorded. Why is it being recorded? Someone in the future is going to have a nice day and they're going to listen to a talk on the Dakini, having a cup of tea at home. Why? What for? Like, what's all this about? I think we have to ask those questions. So easy to just be automatic about it. Come in, write a nice set of notes and not think about it again. No point. And I'm not trying to criticise at all. I'm not being cynical. I think it's an issue, isn't it? It's an issue in what we do, and it's not just an issue for us. It's been an issue for everyone trying to practice the Dharma. And there's a very sort of famous story about Naropa, and it's an issue for Naropa as well. So I'll talk about the story. But you really think about why are you taking notes? What are they for? I won't try and answer that. So this story about Naropa. So Naropa is the teacher of Marpa, and Marpa, as we know, is the teacher or guru of Milarepa. So he's in that lineage, and Naropa. In Nalanda, he was an abbot. He eventually became the abbot of Nalanda. Nalanda in India, big university, like Padmaloka, but much, much bigger. Apparently 10,000 monks, apparently hundreds of Dharma talks every day, not just one, but lots and lots in all sorts of different places. And Naropa is a great debater and eventually became the abbot of Nalanda, so very sort of high-standing teacher. And one day he's in his study, and just sort of involved in his books, looking at different references, really getting into the Dharma, and the sun is streaming through the window, and he's there studying the texts, and suddenly a shadow falls across him and his books, and he looks around startled, and behind him is an old crone, an old hag, sort of dishevelled, shrivelled up old hag, and there's a description of her, so I'll just read the description. Her eyes were red and deep hollowed, her hair was fox-coloured and dishevelled, her forehead large and protruding, her face had many wrinkles and was shrivelled up, her ears were long and lumpy, her nose was twisted and inflamed, she had a yellow beard streaked with white, her mouth was distorted and gaping, her teeth were turned in and decayed, her tongue made chewing movements and moistened her lips. She made sucking noises and licked her lips. She whistled when she yawned. She was weeping and tears ran down her cheeks. She was shivering and panting for breath. Her complexion was darkish blue, her skin rough and thick, her body bent and askew, her neck curved, she was hump-backed, and being lame, she supported herself on a stick. So suddenly Naropa's got this old, sort of frightening old crone standing behind him. And she asks, "What are you looking into? What are you looking into, Naropa?" And he says, "I'm reading books on grammar, logic, and monastic discipline," he says with confidence. And she says, "Do you understand the word of the text or the meaning? Do you understand the words of the text or the meaning?" And he says, "I understand the words." And she's absolutely delighted, and she breaks out into an incredible dance. She dances around the room, waving her stick, hair everywhere, just delighted at what he'd said. And Naropa as well. I'm pleased she's happy. I don't know what's going on, but I'm pleased she's happy. So he also said, "And I understand the meaning." And at that moment, she became immediately crestfallen, downtrodden, and dropped her stick to the ground. And you know, he's suddenly confused, Naropa, and he says, "Why were you happy?" And then became sad. And she says, "Well, I was happy that you, great scholar, didn't lie by saying that you understood the words and not the meaning." And Naropa was immediately shocked back into himself, as it were. Him, an old man, an abbot of Nalanda, biggest university, Buddhist university in the world. If he doesn't understand the meaning, then who does? And he says to her, "Well, who understands the meaning?" And she says, "My brother." And he has this complete reversal view of who he is. He realizes that he doesn't understand the meaning of the words that he understands. And soon after, he steps down as abbot, leaves Nalanda, and goes in search of the Dakini's brother, Tilopa, and practices under him. So if it's a problem for Naropa, it's a problem for us. So we need to really... we really need to know what we're doing. But we need a Dakini. We need a Dakini in our lives. But it's quite an interesting story. It's in a way, there's lots that could be said about it, and I'm not going to say very much because I've got other things to say. But the thing that I think is interesting is that there's something in him that sparked off. So yes, okay, she's quite an enigmatic figure, but there's something in him that's sparked off by her. So I think that's important. Bhante talks about, he says that we're talking about going for refuge for the Sangha. You cannot go for refuge to the Sangha, to the Dakini, unless you have your own Dakini within. We may say that Dakini goes for refuge to Dakini. We may say that Dakini communicates with Dakini. So this is really important. We need a Dakini in our lives in order to be able to go for refuge to the Sangha. And just a little aside. It was so delightful yesterday, wasn't it? Hearing the names in the evening, just read out, really fresh. They come out really fresh, don't they? The first time you hear them, they're just lovely, and they make sense of the person, don't they? You sort of, right, I see the person more clearly. It's just a delight. Reading the names. So you'll all receive a name, so do make sure that you keep your name nice and fresh throughout your life so that it stays alive for you. That's just an aside. Yes, Bhante goes on to say, in other words, within the context of the spiritual community, the spiritual fellowship, our communication with one another is through our own higher emotional nature. We cannot communicate just with the intellect. You cannot really communicate just through ideas or concepts, only through or with the help of your own higher, more spiritual, more refined emotions. So we need the Dakini to awaken those more refined spiritual emotions. And of course, the Dakini isn't not really anyone outside us at all, or doesn't need to be. Needs to be. We need to have a Dakini within. We need to be able to spark our own Dharma life into action. So we need to have a Dakini within. We need to spark our own life into action. Actually, the first image that came to mind when I was thinking about this talk was the image of Ariadne. You know Ariadne, she's a Greek, she's not a Greek goddess, she's a Greek princess, and she lives on Crete. She lived on Crete, and she was the woman who helped Theseus go into the labyrinth and get to the Minotaur. And when Theseus arrived on Crete in order to communicate with the Minotaur, who lived in the sort of the depths of the labyrinth, and Ariadne fell in love with Theseus, and probably it was reciprocated. And Ariadne helps Theseus navigate the labyrinth, and she gives him a ball of thread and a sword, and the instruction is when you're in the labyrinth, always go forwards, always go down, never left or right. And so by following these instructions and using the thread which Theseus tied to the doorpost of the labyrinth, he came across the Minotaur, who was sleeping when he came across him. Quite interesting image, isn't it? Came across the Minotaur who was sleeping, and he awoke the Minotaur, and then a big fight ensued. And unfortunately, Theseus killed the Minotaur. And then, you know what a Minotaur is, a man's body and a bull's head. Very, very frightening figure indeed, very powerful. Anyway, unfortunately, Theseus killed the Minotaur. Anyway, he managed to get out using the thread and come back out of the labyrinth. Anyway, I think that's a really good image. I was just trying to think, well, where is the Dakini in other sort of cultures? Where can we find the Dakini? And I think you can kind of maybe not map it on exactly, but there's this figure, this female figure with a red thread who helps you go into the depths. I think it breaks down a bit because he kills the Minotaur, and we read that as annihilation. And I think that's a shame, because obviously in Buddhism we're trying to transform those energies that the Minotaur represents, not annihilate them. So you shouldn't take it literally, but I think it's a good image in itself. And actually, in another episode, Ariadne also, she's after this episode, I think she's on the island of Naxos, and she falls in love with Bacchus, who's the god of revelry and wine. And there's amazing painting by Titian, isn't there, in the National Gallery? And Bacchus is in the middle of one of his revels with all his revelers, and wine everywhere, and women and naked beasts and drunkenness and so forth. And he spots Ariadne, and she's obviously beautiful, and he's so compelled by her beauty that the image that Titian makes is Bacchus is being drawn out of his chariot in the direction of Ariadne, but Ariadne is pointing up to the stars, so she's pointing up to something higher, beyond herself. So I think Ariadne is not an exact match, but quite a good image of a Dakini, because she is able to take you to the depths of yourself and relate that to the heights. Yeah? So I think that's important. And we were talking about this in our group today, following on from Padmasagwa's talk yesterday. He was talking about the gestalt, wasn't he? And how you need to go back into your life and start looking at your life. And I think that's important. And I think these images give us a representation of that. And I was thinking, I had when I was a lot younger, I don't know, probably early teens or something, the things that I really like doing, or I certainly look back at liking doing now, or the things that stayed with me, I had like a series of pictures of Lamborghinis on the wall. Like they were, I think they might have been airbrushed things. They were 80s, so they were airbrushed gorgeous red Lamborghini cars on a black background. It might have had red grids on something, and I had them in a red frame. And I had about 3. I think there might have been a Lamborghini, a Lotus, and a Ferrari. They were all red. And that was one thing. And then another thing that I really liked doing when I was younger was like studying books on space. Like it's what I didn't really call it study then, but looking back, I realised, I was studying it. I'd get a book like on the space shuttle, for example, and I underline key passages on, I don't know, how it worked or something. And then like I'd read about, the guys going to the moon and all of that stuff. It was really fascinating, but I was really into it. I loved it. No one told me to do it. I just really loved doing it. And I also another thing I did in my room was draw pictures. I just got quite highly detailed black and white drawings with pencils of like little vases and aerosol cans and stuff like that. And I'm still doing that. I'm still doing that. And those things, like I in my room at Padmaloka, I sit. I don't draw anymore. I just sort of splash paint around and see if I can make some sense of it. But it's essentially the same thing that I'm doing as I was doing all those years ago. I don't study space books anymore, but I do study Dharma books, and it's sort of the same thing, if you see what I mean. It's exactly the same kind of pattern that I'm exploring. It's just studying Dharma books takes it up to a much, much higher level, a universal level, rather than a regional level, as it were. And, well, cars on the wall, they represented freedom, speed, liberation, being able to do what I want, all of that. And those are qualities that I really admired, and I can see them in the qualities of the Buddha. and they were important to me, and they're important to me now. And then, interestingly, I got given the name Daka, which means sky walker, the same as Dakini. So in a funny sort of way, I have actually sort of become a sort of a spaceman. If you see what I mean. I know that sounds maybe a bit cheap, but, there is a thread in our lives. There is a thread in our lives. All of us have a thread in our lives which is very, very important to us, if not vital to us. And that thread needs to be gone into and hooked onto the Dharma life. You need to hook all of that onto the Dharma life. So that's why I think the image of Theseus going to the Minotaur, what you look back on doesn't need to be terrifying. The past doesn't need to be terrifying and dark and horrible. Not to say there isn't some of that in there, but there's also the motivating forces of your life, and they need to be hooked onto the Dharma. So these are Bhante talks about these. These are the forces. There are these forces, these primordial forces, so to speak, within ourselves. These are the forces which have to be subdued, which doesn't mean crushed, held down by force, but integrated into our conscious attitude, so that our conscious attitude, our conscious being, our conscious personality, if you like, can be enriched, so that our spiritual life isn't just some pale, anemic thing, so that it is glowing, as it were, and throbbing with the energy of the Dakinis, with the energy of the gods and the demons that have been tamed and transformed. And I was reading Bante's poetry recently, and which is really wonderful to read chronologically. It got a lot from it. Such a lot of emotion and love expressed and devotion. And came across this poem, which is between a poem called Padmaloka and a poem written for the dedication of the shrine and the opening of the LBC in 1978. So I don't know whether, because I'm involved in both of those places, it struck me, or because of what we've just been talking about. But anyway, nestled between those two poems is a poem called The Gods, which I think, it's interesting that Bhante, that poem is nestled in between these two altruistic activities, Padmaloka and the LBC. And in the middle of that, you get this poem. One by one, the gods of the underworld emerge into the light of day. Some have raised arms. Some bear on their heads sun, moon, horns, a wide open lotus flower. Slowly, gravely they move, emerging from the underworld with steady steps, walking in procession along the curved edge of the world. Slowly, gravely they walk, descending into the underworld, into the darkness, and we must follow. So yes, it's important to give our lives, as it were, to places like Padmaloka and LBC in this case, but we also need to go into the darkness and go into the light. The Dakini represents our higher, more emotional, more refined emotional side, and also our primordial energies. Maybe I should actually try and, Padmasagwa did say I would describe the Dakini, so I'll again using Bhante. If I would suggest the best thing to do is just go and look at that image at another time. Just go and look at that image, or buy the photo of it and look at that image. But for those of you who aren't so familiar with Dakinis, this is a description of one. I won't read it all out, but I'll read out bits. Better put my glasses on. Sarva Buddha Dakini. Sarva means all Buddha, of course, means all enlightened ones. So Sarva Buddha Dakini means Dakini of all the Buddhas. So she represents the embodiment of all the energies of all the Buddhas. That's what the Dakini is. So she stands, so what does she look like? She stands upright, so she's not sitting down, she's not meditating, she's standing there. Her legs are wide apart, slightly flexed, she is moving to the right, she has very, very full breasts that are thrust out, and her head is tilted back. Her left arm is raised above, her right arm hangs down, and the whole figure is brilliant red. And she's completely naked. And she wears ornaments of human bone, and she has an enormous garland of skulls, human skulls, around her neck, and her hair is dishevelled and flying all over the place. She holds a chopper with a vajra handle in her right hand. In her left hand she holds a skull cup filled with blood, and she's lifting up the skull cup and pouring the liquid, the blood, out into her open mouth, and she's drinking it with enjoyment and delight. She has what's called a wrathful smile. She has 3 eyes, and she wears a crown of human skulls. And on her left shoulder, horizontally, is a staff, and at the end of the staff is a dharmaru with streamers, a vase of initiation, 3 human heads, and a vajra. And she's trampling underfoot, two underfoot figures. One of them's red, one of them's black. Each has 4 arms. And she's surrounded by a halo of flames. And that's what she looks like. So we could go into this. I'm not going to go into it. The only thing that I want to mention is red, is that she's red. And I think just the one thing to mention about that is when you blush, you turn red, don't you? And when you blush is when emotion is at the surface. That's essentially what seems to be happening. You suddenly feel your emotion, and it's seen. It's visible. So a Dakini, the Dakini, everything's visible. All the emotion is at the surface. There's nothing left uncovered. So all of that energy, all of that emotion is available to practice the Dharma. And I think when you get ordained, we were talking about this in our group today. You need to know who's getting ordained, don't you? You need to know yourself. So who is it who's getting ordained? If you don't know who you are, it's going to be problematic, especially after ordination. And not only that, your preceptor needs to know who he's ordaining. So in the lead up to ordination, you need to be examining your life more and more fully and communicating that with your preceptor so that you know who you are, so that you started connecting with a thread, the past to your highest ideals. So I think this also brings us to the area of communication, doesn't it? because let's have a think. Why does it bring us to the area of communication? I mean, in a way, I did think, it would be in a way much better to just do the communication exercises for this hour, really, than give a talk on the Dharma, on the Dakini. That would get to the nub of things. If we spent, I mean, I couldn't believe Suwata said they used to spend 4 hours doing communication exercises. I mean, I remember doing them for 1 hour when I came along. But communication is vital. No communication, no sangha, and there's no communication without refined spiritual emotion. Bhante says, there's no genuine spiritual emotion. Without genuine spiritual emotion, there is no communication. That's very, very shocking, isn't it? Without genuine spiritual emotion, there is no communication. So it might be worth exploring what that means in your group. But without communication, there's no sangha. There isn't such a thing as a spiritual community. There's just communication, and communication that arises out of spiritual emotion. Bhante says about communication, it's not very easy to say what it is. For the purpose of exploring the Sangha refuge, a working definition might be a vital mutual responsiveness on the basis of a common ideal and a common principle. A shared exploration of the spiritual world between people who are in a relationship of complete honesty and harmony. The communication is the exploration, and the exploration is the communication. In this way, spiritual progress takes place. It may not be clear exactly how it happens, but happen it certainly does. So if we're going to make spiritual progress, communication needs to take place. And for communication to take place, there needs to be genuine spiritual emotion, and for genuine spiritual emotion to be present, you need to have done the work to bring your life into the Dharma. In a way, this is what the Dakini represents, all these aspects. And so it's very, very important to have this going on for the Sangha to exist. Just a few things that I'm going to move into now. Just what goes on in communication? What actually happens in communication? We know it's not just an exchange of words. We know that. We're told, aren't we, from an early age that most of communication isn't the words. We know that. But when you do get into communication, if you do get into full communication with another person, and you can do that in communication exercises, but other times as well, there's a breakdown of a distinction, isn't there? There's a breakdown of a distinction between yourself and the other person. That so-called solid separation seems to dissolve in communication. Very, very important. And it's similar in aesthetic experience. When you have an aesthetic experience, the separation between you and the object that you're looking at breaks down, and you have an experience of that object in a very, very different way. We call it beauty. But it's the same thing that's happening, I think. A very similar thing that's happening. So communication and aesthetics are very intimately linked. Both really are an absence of obstruction, aren't they? Less object and subject, less distinctions between people. And So that's when the Dakini emerges, because the Dakini is in space. The Dakini is completely unobstructed in any way whatsoever. And so the Dakini emerges when we enter deep communication, because the obstructions that are normally there, the subject and the object, the me and the other person, dissolve. So the Dakini can live. And similar in aesthetic experience. But we also, we need to look, and we might not be able to ignite our own Dakini within, so we do need help from outside, as it were. We do need other people to spark us off from time to time. We can't always do it ourselves. So who do we look for? Who do we look for to spark us off? You need to know who sparks you off. I'm just going to make a suggestion that the best person to look for is the artist. Yeah, is the artist. And I don't mean the person who holds a paintbrush or is halfway through writing a poem. I know from my own experience, just because I hold a paintbrush doesn't mean to say that A, I'm in positive mental states, B, that I'm doing anything remotely creative. So I don't mean an artist in that sense, not literally like that. But Padmaloka says, I do think that creating Sangha is the most creative act that it is possible for human beings to engage in. It's pretty strong, isn't it, Padmaloka? I do think that creating Sangha is the most creative act that it is possible for human beings to engage in. So I think that's much more what's meant by artist. Someone who is living a genuinely creative life, and they may or may not be engaged directly with the arts. Bhante talks about the artist as someone who communicates a higher sense of value, a spirit of delight, the experience of a higher mode of being and consciousness. They can evoke higher forces than themselves. And of course, Bhante's well-known quote about art. Art is the organisation of sensuous impressions that express the artist's sensibility and communicate to his audience a sense of values that can transform their lives. So in a way, the artist is the best communicator. The artist is the best communicator. So the artist is maybe one step down from the Dakini. Maybe you can't quite get to the Dakini, but you can get to the Dakini through the artist. So just a little bit about the artist, just to fill that out a bit. And this is more of a list as well, so it's good for note taking, and it'll give you something concrete to talk about rather than all those images. So, Bhante talks about the artist in What is the Sangha in, I think it's called The Artist as a True Individual. There's a chapter, and he talks about the artist as someone who participates in the higher evolution of humanity. So that's the first point. He says he's more alive than other people. The artist is more alive than other people. And the artist is sensitive to the world, much more sensitive to the world, to the colours, to the shapes, to the forms, to what's going on. So an artist, being with an artist, can awaken us to being more aware of the world, seeing the world in different ways that we see ourselves. the artist is also more aware of their own responses to things. They need to be more aware, don't they? Because if they're being creative, they need to know what's going on. So they're more aware to their own responses, their emotions, their mental states, and they're more aware of others. But they're also aware of something beyond all of these things. So the artist is also has some incomprehensible awareness of reality itself. So they're sensitive to the meaning and mystery of existence. And the artist also has positive and refined emotions, can empathise with others, and is just more aware. And the artist is independent in spirit and mostly free from group conditioning. They're simply trying to lead their own life and be themselves. The artist is creative and productive. So they have an uninterrupted flow of creativity, which basically means hard work, even being obsessed. And the artist is, they're alone. They're isolated from the masses because of their greater awareness and creativity. So this is, I think, how you get closer to a Dakini, or if you need to be sparked off, if you need a Dakini in your life, you need to get closer to an artist in the very, very broad creative sense of being able to live a creative life. And So that brings me to the end of my talk. I've got nothing left to say. My text has run out, and I'm afraid I haven't even got a poem to neatly kind of smooth over the ending, so I'm just going to have to leave it there, and you'll have to take it as I've delivered it. So, yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.